The photograph you see is over 150 years old, yet it feels alive. It is not just an image. It is a window into a moment that should never have existed. Staring back at you is Catherine Doyle, only 9 years old in 1871, but her eyes are not those of a child. They are ancient, cold, and knowing, as if she carries centuries of secrets no one was meant to witness. Look at her posture, rigid, deliberate, a calculated stillness that no playful innocence could create. What you are seeing is the face of a mind that has touched things the world was never meant to touch. Catherine's story begins in the gray streets of post-Civil War Boston. The city, still scarred by blood and upheaval, was a place where the human spirit was fragile, and superstition whispered through the alleys. Her parents, Patrick and Mary Doyle, had arrived from Ireland seeking a new life, burdened by hunger, hope, and the heavy weight of survival. Their daughter, Catherine, was ordinary, at least until she wasn't. On the morning of September 14, 1869, something impossible occurred. Catherine awoke, changed, not in appearance, not in voice, but in the very essence of her being. She moved differently, spoke differently, and most unsettling of all, she began knowing things she could not have possibly known. Historical events she had never studied, languages she had never learned, intimate secrets of neighbors and strangers, all seemed to flow from her without effort. But it was not knowledge alone that unsettled those around her. There was a hunger in her curiosity, a fascination with death, suffering, and the mechanisms of human pain that went far beyond the innocence of childhood. By the time her parents realized the transformation was real, it was too late. Ordinary interventions, comfort, discipline, religious guidance, failed to reach her. Father Timothy O'Brien, a man of God, attempted an exorcism. It did not produce screams or convulsions. Instead, Catherine recited the ritual with him, anticipating every word before he spoke it, and laughed, a sound that echoed unnaturally, as if more than one voice lived within her small body. It was a moment that should have terrified them, and it did, but it was only the beginning. Doctors, clergy, neighbors, none could comprehend what Catherine had become. She was a child, yes, but one with knowledge, power, and awareness far beyond the human scale. What had touched her that night? What had crossed into her mind and refused to leave? And here, you, watching, are beginning to understand the danger of seeing what others cannot. There is a truth in Catherine Doyle's story that is not written in textbooks, not preserved in records meant for polite society. It is a knowledge that unsettles, that whispers of forces lurking behind the veil of reality. And once you see it, there is no turning back. Catherine Doyle's earliest years were unremarkable. To the casual eye, she was a typical child of Boston's North End, curious, obedient, playful. Her small apartment, cramped and dimly lit, was filled with the aromas of bread baking in neighboring kitchens and the chatter of Irish neighbors. Her mother, Mary, a domestic worker for Beacon Hill families, and her father, Patrick, a longshoreman at the bustling Boston port, lived lives dictated by survival and routine. Yet beneath this ordinary exterior, Catherine was already absorbing the world in ways no one noticed. She memorized more than lessons. She memorized people. She noticed patterns in behavior, subtle tensions, the fleeting expressions that others dismissed. By age 7, she was reciting prayers in Latin with perfect fluency and could recount stories from the Bible that even her parish priests struggled to recall. Friends described her as intelligent, yes, but not extraordinary, a normal child with an unusual focus. That focus, however, was about to become something else entirely, something the world would not understand. September 14, 1869 was the day the ordinary shattered. Catherine awoke, not as the little girl her parents had known, but as a being aware of truths invisible to those around her. Her voice carried an unexpected depth. Her gaze seemed to pierce the walls of the apartment, seeing secrets that had no reason to exist in a child's mind. She knew things about the past, details of the American Revolution, obscure facts about ancient cultures that had never been taught. She spoke of Plato and Aristotle with the certainty of someone who had lived their ideas. But knowledge was only the surface. What truly unsettled her parents was the darkness that came with it. Catherine began asking questions about death, about the mechanics of suffering, with a precision and interest that chilled the air. She described the methods of the Spanish Inquisition, the tortures of medieval courts, and the rituals of mummification as if she had witnessed them firsthand. Her fascination was not abstract, it was personal. Her smile, once warm and childlike, became cold, calculated, almost predatory. Even more disturbing were the glimpses of physical transformation. She began showing strength and endurance that defied her age. Chairs splintered beneath her grip, wooden tables bore the imprint of her fingers as if pressed by steel. She could withstand cold and discomfort that would have sent adults running, yet these physical anomalies were nothing compared to the sensation she evoked in those who looked into her eyes, a presence so overwhelming, so unnatural, that it left adults feeling exposed, vulnerable, and afraid without understanding why. And so the ordinary world recoiled. Teachers, neighbors, even family began to sense that Catherine Doyle was no longer just a child. She had crossed into something forbidden, and with that crossing came knowledge and power that would draw the attention of forces both human and otherwise. Her story is not merely about a girl. It is a warning. There are truths the human mind was never meant to grasp, and Catherine Doyle grasped them anyway. The weeks after that September morning marked the beginning of a subtle, creeping horror. Catherine Doyle was still a child in form, but every interaction hinted at something impossible lying beneath the surface. She began to speak of events she could not have witnessed, of lives she could not have known. During meals, she described neighbors' secrets, infidelities, debts, unspoken fears, with unsettling accuracy. Her parents, Patrick and Mary, initially chalked it up to coincidence, imagination, or some childlike mimicry. But coincidence does not account for the details no one could have shared. Even strangers felt the change. Catherine's eyes, once a familiar warm brown, now seemed to flicker with a depth no human soul should carry. Those who met her gaze reported sudden headaches, chills, and unease that would not dissipate. Animals, sensitive to forces humans ignore, recoiled. Dogs barked and ran, cats vanished from rooms she entered, birds avoided her presence. She would smile at the phenomenon and, with a quiet certainty, remark, "They know what I am now, Mommy. They're smarter than you." Her obsession with death and suffering grew. At first it was subtle curiosity, questions about how people died, about illnesses, accidents. But soon it became precise and technical. Catherine could describe execution methods of distant lands, the anatomy of torture devices, and the minutiae of ancient rituals with a familiarity that defied explanation. She did not speak as a student, as a mimic, or even as a prodigy. She spoke as a witness, a scholar of the unimaginable. Physical manifestations began in tandem with this intellectual and psychological expansion. Catherine displayed strength beyond her years, bending objects meant to withstand adult force. She remained motionless for hours, standing in the dead of night, staring at walls as though listening to whispers no one else could hear. During the harsh Boston winter, she ventured into the snow in a nightgown, impervious to cold. Observers would later note the slow, measured pulse in her wrists, her unusually low body temperature, and the hypnotic quality of her gaze that seemed to penetrate reality itself. And yet the most chilling aspect was her pleasure in this transformation. Self-inflicted pain became a ritual. She scratched, bit, and struck herself with meticulous deliberation, never flinching, never crying, always smiling. The ecstasy she seemed to derive was not of this world, and the adults around her, her loving parents, were powerless to intervene. By now it was clear, Catherine Doyle had ceased to be merely a child. She was something else, something ancient, something that had crossed a boundary humans were never meant to cross. And this was only the beginning. The world would soon bear witness to her knowledge, her power, and the horrors it could unlock. Desperation became the lodestar for Patrick and Mary Doyle. They had exhausted the ordinary world of teachers, neighbors, and concerned friends. The girl they had loved was gone. Or perhaps she had always been something else, hiding beneath the surface of innocence. With trembling hands and hearts heavy with fear, they turned to the church, the last bastion of authority capable of confronting the unexplainable. Father Timothy O'Brien, a man who had known Catherine since birth, agreed to intervene. What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. The exorcism was conducted in the dim light of the Doyles' small apartment. Only the family and an elderly deacon were present. Candles flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that danced like specters. The ritual began, Father O'Brien reciting the sacred Latin incantations. He expected resistance, perhaps fear or anguish, common reactions, at least according to his training. But Catherine Doyle responded differently. She did not scream. She did not convulse. She did not blaspheme. Instead, she mirrored him, word for word, anticipating each line before it left his lips. Her voice, soft, yet unnervingly confident, blended with his own, creating the disorienting impression that more than one presence occupied the room. And then, laughter. Loud, echoing, layered. Multiple tones intertwined in a sound that seemed too complex, too resonant, to emerge from a single child. It was not the laughter of amusement. It was the laughter of recognition, of power, of something knowing far beyond human comprehension. Father O'Brien, a man of faith and experience, faltered. Every exorcism he had conducted relied on the supplicants' vulnerability, their fear, their resistance. Here, there was none. Catherine's eyes, dark, ancient, predatory, met his, and he felt the weight of intelligence accumulated over centuries pressing due upon him. He was no longer the authority in the room. He was a spectator to something beyond him, something that had chosen to reveal itself through a child. After that night, it became evident that the church could not contain what Catherine had become. Every attempt at intervention, every prayer, every ritual only highlighted the impossibility of her condition. Catherine Doyle was no longer a child to be corrected or healed. She was a conduit for knowledge and power. Humans were never meant to witness, and her presence reshaped the rules of reality itself. The Doyles, left with no alternative, sought the tools of science next. They turned to medicine, hoping that logic, observation, and empirical study could explain what faith could not. Yet what awaited them in the hands of Dr. Henry Morrison would only deepen the horror. For Catherine's mind, body, and perhaps soul were far beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. Dr. Henry Morrison, a meticulous and respected physician trained in Europe, approached Catherine Doyle with cautious skepticism. He had seen unusual cases before, bright children, prodigies, eccentric minds, but nothing prepared him for what he would encounter in the winter of 1870. The Doyles, desperate and frightened, allowed him access to their daughter, hoping that science could reveal what faith could not. What science found, however, only confirmed that Catherine was something entirely beyond human understanding. From the first session, Morrison noted her intellect, precise, calculating, unnervingly complete. But it was not mere intelligence, it was a knowledge of death, decay, and human suffering far beyond her age. She could describe diseases rarely seen, human anatomy with uncanny accuracy, and the processes of injury and decomposition in exacting detail. Her understanding of medicine rivaled advanced students, yet she wielded it casually, almost playfully, as though she were already practicing in the shadows of life and death. Her writing was equally disturbing. She produced sketches not of toys or houses, but of skeletons, bodies in agony, and scenes of torture executed with anatomical precision, drawings of dismemberment, contorted limbs, and suffering so precise that even trained surgeons felt a creeping unease. These were not the random imaginings of a child. They were compositions with purpose, intention, and understanding that should have been impossible for someone of her age and experience. Languages, too, flowed through her effortlessly. Latin, Greek, even rudimentary Egyptian hieroglyphs appeared in her notebooks, written with fluency she could not have learned. When Dr. Morrison asked how she knew them, Catherine smiled, as though sharing a secret, and said simply, "The words come to me when I need them." It was a response both simple and terrified, for it implied that knowledge itself obeyed her will. And then came the phenomena Morrison could not explain. Plants in his office began to wither in her presence, despite proper light, water, and soil. Clocks occasionally stopped, the air seemed to grow cold, and the doctor reported a sensation of being examined, studied by a mind that was old, patient, and infinitely knowing. When he looked into her eyes, he described a darkness beyond brown, an intelligence that weighed on him, probing his thoughts and understanding his fears before he could articulate them. It became undeniable. Catherine Doyle was no ordinary child. She was a locus of forbidden knowledge, a vessel through which the impossible had entered the world. Faith had failed, science struggled to comprehend, and yet there she was, sitting in his office, perfectly still, smiling as if aware that the universe itself had shifted to accommodate her presence. By early 1870, it was no longer just Catherine Doyle's mind that unsettled the world, it was her body. What Dr. Morrison and her parents witnessed could not be rationalized by science, psychology, or ordinary human capability. Strength, endurance, and resilience appeared in the child in ways that defied every known law of biology. Small hands, once delicate, now shattered solid oak chairs with effortless precision. Fingerprints pressed into wooden tables left impressions deep enough to seem carved by steel rather than flesh. Attempts to erase them failed. They remained, haunting proof of her impossible power. Her endurance, too, was beyond comprehension. Catherine could stand, motionless for hours, staring at walls in the dead of night. On one occasion, she remained in the same position from dinner until the early morning, unflinching, unyielding. The parents observed her outside in Boston's winter snow, wrapped in a mere nightgown, perfectly unharmed, displaying no symptoms of hypothermia. Ordinary humans would shiver, weaken, even collapse. Catherine laughed quietly at the cold, as if she could command the weather itself to bend around her presence. And her eyes, always her eyes, were the most disturbing. Neighbors and acquaintances reported dizziness, nausea, and a creeping dread when they looked directly into them. The color shifted subtly, sometimes darker than brown, almost black, almost like a void. At times, her pupils seemed to contain shapes that moved independently of the light, as if something else lurked within her gaze, observing the observers. The sensation was universally reported, a feeling of exposure, of being penetrated by intelligence far older and more powerful than anything human. Even her interactions with animals confirmed the unnatural. Dogs barked and fled, cats vanished, birds refused to land nearby, and when questioned, Catherine only led that same cold, knowing smile and said, "They know what I am now. They're smarter than you." There was a predatory awareness in her every movement, a deliberate assertion that she no longer belonged to the ordinary world. It was now clear to everyone who encountered her. Catherine Doyle had become more than a child. She was a force, a presence, a locus where knowledge, strength, and unnatural perception converged. The boundaries of human understanding were already breaking under her gaze. Faith had failed. Science had failed. Society, unprepared for her existence, recoiled. And yet, she thrived in this darkness, her abilities growing, her comprehension expanding, her awareness stretching into realms the living were forbidden to know. Catherine's transformation was no longer a secret kept within the walls of her home. It was a force moving outward, shaping perception, bending reality, and leaving everyone who dared to observe her with a deep, unshakable sense that the world had changed forever. Catherine Doyle's curiosity about the world had always been sharp, but by 1870 it had become morbid, precise, and terrifying. She did not ask the casual questions children ask about death. Why do people die? Or, what happens afterward? No, Catherine demanded specifics. The mechanics of execution, the architecture of torture, the anatomy of suffering. She could describe the Spanish Inquisition, ancient assassination techniques, and Egyptian mummification with an unsettling intimacy, as if she had witnessed them firsthand. Her descriptions were clinical, detailed, and yet delivered with a disturbing glee. Self-harm became a ritual. Catherine scratched herself until she bled, bit her lips raw, struck her head against walls. She did not flinch or cry. Instead, she seemed to enter a state of ecstasy, a pleasure that her parents could not comprehend. When Mary Doyle tried to intervene, Catherine only shrugged or whispered, "I feel like it," or "it asks me to." The pronoun was ambiguous, almost sinister, as if some external intelligence guided her hand. Her delight in pain was not childish or whimsical. It was deliberate, calculated, and deeply unnatural. Her fascination extended to the suffering of others. She would watch injuries, illnesses, and even minor accidents with an analytical interest that unsettled every adult in the room. Conversations about death were not macabre storytelling. They were studies, experiments, rehearsals of knowledge and power beyond her age. Yet she spoke with a calmness, a mastery, as if she had rehearsed these discussions for centuries. People who tried to challenge her understanding, priests, doctors, family, felt a creeping dread, a sense of inferiority not just in knowledge, but in essence. Catherine was older than them all. She was beyond them. Even her relationship with animals became distorted. Creatures avoided her, sensing the present that she carried. Dogs barked frantically, cats disappeared from rooms, birds refused to land near her. When Mary asked why, Catherine's answer was chilling in its simplicity. "They know what I am now. They're smarter than you." The assertion was not boastful. It was fact. It carried the weight of inevitable truth. By this point, Catherine Doyle was no longer a child in the conventional sense. She had become a lens through which the world revealed its hidden, forbidden dimensions. Those around her began to notice patterns, coincidences, and distortions of reality that followed her presence. The ordinary rules of society, of human behavior, even of nature, no longer applied. Catherine had crossed a threshold. She had touched knowledge, power, and perception that humans were never meant to reach, and she carried it effortlessly with a calm, predatory certainty. The night of the exorcism remains one of the most chilling episodes in Catherine Doyle's life, though few outside the Doyle household would ever know the details. Father Timothy O'Brien, a seasoned priest who had baptized and guided her since infancy, entered the small apartment with a mix of faith and apprehension. He carried the rituals, prayers, and rites that had expelled darkness from others countless times, but Catherine Doyle was no ordinary case. The candles flickered against the walls, shadows twisting unnaturally in the corners of the room. The ritual began. Father O'Brien recited the prayers, expecting resistance, fear, agony, or perhaps blasphemy from a child possessed. But Catherine did none of these. She mirrored him perfectly, word for word, anticipating each Latin phrase before he even pronounced it. Her voice blended with his in a harmony that was uncanny, almost impossible. It was as if the ritual itself acknowledged her authority rather than asserting his. Then came the laughter. A low, echoing sound that grew louder, layering itself upon itself, until it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Father O'Brien froze. This was not the sound of a child being tormented or resisting. It was the sound of awareness, of power, of something ancient and far beyond his comprehension. Every line of the exorcism was met with Catherine's perfect repetition, her voice imbued with confidence, anticipation, and an almost terrifying mastery. As the ritual progressed, Father O'Brien felt a weight pressing on his mind, a sensation of being observed and analyzed by a consciousness far older, far more experienced than his own. Each glance into her eyes was like staring into a void that knew every secret he had ever held, every doubt he had ever whispered. He was no longer the authority in the room. He was the subject, and Catherine Doyle, the examiner. By the end of the night, the priest was shaken to his core. He recorded later in his private diary, a record discovered decades after his death, that he had never experienced fear like it. Not fear of a child, not fear of evil, but fear of intelligence itself, concentrated, deliberate, and fully aware. The exorcism had failed utterly, but it revealed a truth far more disturbing. Catherine Doyle was not possessed. She was something beyond ordinary comprehension, a presence that manipulated reality itself through knowledge, will, and perception. From that night onward, faith could offer no solution. The Church recoiled. Science remained the only remaining avenue, yet, as Dr. Morrison would soon discover, even the tools of medicine would struggle to comprehend the magnitude of what Catherine had become. When Catherine Doyle was finally placed under the observation of Dr. Henry Morrison, the stage was set for a confrontation between science and something utterly unexplainable. Morrison, a man of precision, logic, and empirical rigor, had trained in Europe where psychiatry was approaching sophistication. He expected intelligence, perhaps precocity, maybe even a case of trauma-induced genius. What he found was something entirely different, a mind, body, and presence that defied every principle he had studied. From the first session, Catherine's knowledge astonished him. She spoke of diseases, injuries, and human anatomy with exacting detail, rivaling medical students twice her age. She explained obscure remedies, alternative treatments, and physiological mechanisms he had never encountered outside advanced medical texts. And yet the knowledge was selective. Her genius was directed almost exclusively toward death, decay, and suffering. It was as if the universe had entrusted her with forbidden expertise that humans were not meant to wield. Her linguistic abilities were equally impossible. Latin flowed naturally. Greek phrases emerged without study, and rudimentary hieroglyphs appeared in her notebooks as if summoned by some internal force. When Morrison asked how she knew these languages, she simply smiled and said, "The words come to me when I need them." It was a casual declaration of authority over knowledge itself. Even the physical environment responded to her presence. Plants withered in her room despite proper care, clocks occasionally slowed or stopped, and a coldness lingered in corners where no draft existed. Morrison described feeling watched, not just observed, but analyzed, understood, as if Catherine's consciousness stretched beyond the child in front of him. Ordinary human logic, he realized, could not encompass the phenomenon. Her drawings and writings confirmed what he feared most. There were no depictions of children's play, no mundane doodles. Instead, anatomically precise skeletons, figures in agony, and scenes of decay filled her pages. The images were technical, deliberate, and deeply disturbing, combining artistic skill with knowledge no 7-year-old could acquire. Every line suggested an understanding of life and death far beyond her years. Morrison began to suspect that Catherine Doyle was not merely a prodigy or an extraordinary child. She was something else entirely, a vessel, a locus where knowledge, perception, and unnatural power converged. Every observation reinforced the same terrifying conclusion. Catherine had crossed the boundary between childhood and something far older, far more powerful, and utterly beyond human comprehension. It was no longer just Catherine Doyle's mind that unsettled those around her. By the early months of 1870, her body betrayed the same impossible transformations that her intellect displayed. Small hands, once delicate and childlike, began to exhibit strength far beyond the capacity of a 7-year-old. Oak chairs, ordinary pieces of furniture, snapped under her grip as if they were brittle twigs. Fingerprints pressed into the wood remained deep, unyielding impressions, marks that no amount of sanding could erase. Her parents could only stare in silent terror, realizing that their daughter had become something they could no longer understand or control. Her endurance was equally unnatural. Catherine could stand motionless for hours, eyes fixed on a single point, breathing slow and even, as if time itself conformed to her will. Once she remained in the same position from dinner until the early morning, not shifting an inch. On bitter Boston nights, she wandered outside in only her nightgown, unaffected by the snow and ice that would have incapacitated any normal child. Patrick Doyle found her in the backyard one frigid morning, calm, serene, entirely unharmed. It was impossible, yet undeniable. And then there were her eyes that had become something else entirely. Neighbors reported dizziness, headaches, and unease after gazing into her stare. Brown as they were by description, they sometimes appeared nearly black, fathomless, shifting with her moods, reflecting shapes and movements that had no source in the natural world. It was as if something ancient, intelligent, and hidden resided within her pupils, observing the living as they unwittingly observed her. Her relationship with animals mirrored this strangeness. Dogs barked frantically at her approach, cats fled, and birds avoided the yard entirely. When asked why, Catherine's response was a chilling declaration. In effect, "They know what I am now. They're smarter than you." Her voice was calm, her smile cold, but it carried the weight of certainty. Every creature, every observer, understood that she no longer belonged to the ordinary laws of the world. By now, faith and science had both reached their limits. Catherine Doyle was no longer a child to be corrected, educated, or disciplined. She was a force, a presence, a locus of forbidden knowledge, endurance, and power. Her very existence was a challenge to reality, a reminder that the boundaries humans relied on, intellect, physicality, morality, could be bent, broken, and surpassed. And yet, she moved among them all, serene, knowing, waiting, always observing, always testing. Catherine Doyle's fascination with death and suffering had become a force of its own. It was no longer idle curiosity. She demanded knowledge with precision, asking not general questions about mortality, but specifics, the mechanics of executions, the anatomy of injury, the intricacies of torture across centuries. She could describe the Spanish Inquisition, ancient assassinations, and mummification practices with a clarity that suggested first-hand observation. Her voice carried no horror, no guilt, only a calm, unsettling mastery. Self-harm emerged as a ritualistic behavior. Catherine scratched herself until her skin bled, bit her lips until raw, slammed her head against walls. She never whimpered, never pleaded for relief. Instead, she appeared to enter a state of ecstasy, a pleasure that unnerved her parents to the core. Mary Doyle tried to intervene, yet Catherine shrugged, whispering only, "I feel like it, or it asks me to." The pronoun, "it," was vague, almost sinister, implying an unseen force guiding her actions. Her interest in human suffering extended to observation. Injuries, illnesses, even minor accidents drew her attention. She would study the reactions of others, cataloging pain and fear as if performing experiments. Conversations about death were clinical, analytical. People who attempted to challenge her understanding felt a creeping dread, as if their knowledge, their morality, their very identity were inferior. Catherine was older than them, wiser than them, and frighteningly aware of it. Even animals reacted to the transformation. Dogs barked and fled, cats avoided her entirely, and birds refused to enter her space. When asked why, she only smiled, her words chilling. "They know what I am now. They're smarter than you." The statement carried no arrogance. It was a statement of undeniable truth, a declaration that her nature had changed, and that the world around her instinctively recognized it. Catherine Doyle had ceased to be merely a child. She had become a prism through which death, knowledge, and power refracted. Ordinary humans could not approach her without unease. Faith could not explain her, science could not contain her, and society could not comprehend her. Every encounter left observers unsettled, aware that the world they knew had been infiltrated by something ancient, intelligent, and irrevocably beyond their control. When Catherine Doyle entered Dr. Henry Morrison's office, the world itself seemed to react. Plants, healthy and thriving, wilted within hours of her arrival. Clocks slowed, stopped, or skipped intervals, as if time itself recoiled from her presence. A chill lingered in the air, unnatural and unexplainable, seeping into corners with no draft or source. Morrison, a man of methodical science, initially dismissed these occurrences as coincidence. By the end of the first week, he knew better. Observation after observation revealed that her presence distorted the ordinary. Chairs creaked under invisible pressures, shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, and even the sunlight that streamed through the windows appeared muted, as though hesitant to touch her. It was not malicious, at least not in the conventional sense, but purposeful, deliberate, as if the world itself deferred to her authority. Morrison documented every detail meticulously. Catherine spoke with precision about human anatomy, physiology, and obscure diseases. She wrote fluently in Latin, ancient Greek, and even rudimentary hieroglyphs she had never studied, explaining their meanings as if they had always been a part of her consciousness. But it was her eyes that unsettled him most. Brown, shifting to black in certain lights, they contained something alive, something aware, something older than time. Morrison felt exposed, analyzed, as if she saw beyond the surface into the core of his thoughts and fears. Her drawings were not the playful scribbles of a child. They depicted human bodies in torment, precise depictions of skeletal structures, decay, and suffering. Each stroke suggested technical knowledge far beyond her years. Morrison recognized that he was no longer merely observing a prodigy. He was witnessing an intelligence that had bypassed the conventional limitations of childhood, morality, and even humanity. The doctor's skepticism began to erode under the weight of the evidence. Logic failed to explain the plants, the clocks, the unnatural cold, or the reactions of those who dared to meet her gaze. Catherine Doyle was a disruption of the natural order. Her presence reshaped reality, bending the laws of physics, perception, and human understanding around her. By the end of those first weeks, Morrison understood the terrifying truth. She was no ordinary child. She was something else entirely, a locus of forbidden knowledge, unnatural power, and awareness that humans were never meant to confront. Every inch of her presence radiated the certainty of inevitability. And yet, Catherine moved through it all with calm, almost regal composure, entirely aware of the dread she inspired. Catherine Doyle's body became a mirror of her extraordinary mind. Her small frame concealed strength far beyond any child of her age. Oak chairs, tables, and other objects shattered under her grip, leaving her parents speechless. Her fingers left deep, permanent impressions in wood, marks that no sanding or effort could erase. These were not accidents. They were demonstrations of force, controlled and deliberate, as if she were testing the boundaries of her own capabilities and the limits of those around her. Endurance became another weapon she wielded effortlessly. Catherine could remain in a single position for hours, immobile, eyes locked on a point, breathing calm and regular, as though oblivious to the passage of time. On one winter morning, Patrick Doyle discovered her standing in the snow in only her nightgown, without discomfort, without shivering, perfectly composed. The world that governed ordinary children seemed irrelevant to her. The natural laws of human endurance no longer applied. Her cold resistance was not mere tolerance. It was command. She walked through the harshest Boston winters with a serenity that unnerved neighbors, an eerie proof that her body answered to something other than the natural order. Even her parents, who had tried to maintain normal routines, now found themselves witnesses to something profoundly alien in their home. Catherine's physical mastery was proof that her transformation was complete, not just in mind, but in flesh and bone. And then there were her eyes, the windows to a presence that went beyond the physical. Those who dared to meet her gaze reported dizziness, headaches, a creeping unease, the sensation of being measured, understood, and exposed. Normally brown, they would darken unpredictably, becoming nearly black, shifting with her moods or intentions. Occasionally, shapes seemed to move within the depths of her pupils, forms her parents could not name, hints of intelligence older than any human they had encountered. Even animals responded instinctively to her altered presence. Dogs barked and fled, cats vanished from rooms, and birds avoided her entirely. When Mary Doyle asked why, Catherine's reply was chillingly simple. "They know what I am now. They're smarter than you." It was not boastful. It was factual, a declaration of inevitability. She was no longer a child. She had become a force, a presence that the natural world recognized as something beyond comprehension. Catherine Doyle had transcended the ordinary. Her strength, endurance, and uncanny presence were proof that she no longer obeyed the limits of childhood, biology, or human expectation. She existed on a different plane, and every interaction with her reminded the adults around her that the familiar world was no longer sufficient to contain her. Catherine Doyle vanished from ordinary understanding long before her final days. The girl who had whispered of things that shouldn't exist, the child whose eyes reflected intelligence older than time, had become a living testament to the limits of human comprehension. Doctors, priests, neighbors, and even her own parents had witnessed phenomena that no explanation could contain. She had crossed the line between child and force, mind and presence, reality and something far darker. Her story, preserved in fragmented medical reports, diaries, and whispered recollections, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a warning. Some truths are too vast, too profound, too dangerous to exist within the familiar bounds of our world. Catherine's life revealed knowledge that could unsettle reality itself. The possibility that human existence is neither fixed nor absolute, that some consciousnesses operate outside the rules we depend upon, and that the universe itself can bend to the will of those it deems extraordinary. Even today, the echoes of Catherine Doyle remain. The plants she touched, the objects she broke, the animals that recoiled, the people who felt their very thoughts exposed. These are the imprints of a presence that refuses to be forgotten. Scholars debate, doctors speculate, and clergy fear the stories recorded in private journals. Yet the ultimate lesson endures. Encountering forces beyond understanding changes a man forever. And this is why her story matters, not merely as a historical anomaly, but as an awakening. Listen closely, and you will understand that the world is far stranger, darker, and more malleable than anyone admits. The knowledge Catherine carried, the power she embodied, exists at the edges of perception, waiting for those bold or foolish enough to notice it. If you have absorbed her story, if the weight of these revelations has touched you, calm, and below the phrase, "I see the hidden," then comment it again. Let it anchor you. Let it be your admission that you have glimpsed what others cannot, that your awareness has shifted, and that you acknowledge the truths hidden in plain sight. This is the threshold. Beyond it, nothing is as it seems. Catherine Doyle was not merely a girl. She was a force, a warning, and a mirror. She revealed that some knowledge is forbidden for a reason, and that once you see it, there is no returning to innocence. Her whispers still linger, waiting for the next mind brave enough to listen, the next soul willing to confront what should never exist.